My very first drink led to me completely lying on the grass, lost my keys, and I woke up the next morning and said to my best friend, that was the best night ever.
Dr. Elisa Hallerman transformed her journey from Hollywood talent agent to trailblazer in recovery management. She founded the first of its kind recovery management agency to navigate addiction, trauma, and healing, combining neuroscience and soul to turn crises into purpose.
I was alone in hotel rooms by myself for days, paranoid with furniture up against the door. I realized that I had a problem.
I thought cocaine was the solution to my alcohol problem. By the way, when I found it, I was like, oh, this is amazing. All my problems, because I was a blackout drinker. And I was like, now I don't black out. Now I'm drinking like my friends. This is incredible.
Stop for 30 days. Look at how you feel and look at the reason. If you're feeling need to go to it, I think the better question to ask yourself is why. Serious mental health conditions, underlying trauma, we tend to lose our way. What we do know is that trauma experiences are stored on a cellular level in our bodies. That is what needs to be released, because otherwise...
Welcome, Elisa.
Thank you, Arielle. Thank you so much for having me.
Really looking forward to talking to you. We have a connection outside of this, which is that we go to the same hair person.
We do. We do.
Liz, how long have you been a client of Liz? Let's shout her out.
I've been a client of Liz Young longer than I think I've been sober.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Whoa.
I met her when she was assisting for Tracy
Cunningham,
the Tracy Cunningham.
Yeah.
And one day Tracy was out and she said, just see Liz. And Liz did my highlights and I was so nervous, of course. And I was obsessed from that moment on.
Yeah.
And so at least 20,
wow,
20, a long, long, long time.
Yeah.
And, don't judge, because I actually need some front, highlights right now. But yeah, there's no one better. I get stopped everywhere.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. She's the best. So Liz, we love you.
We love you.
You have been sober how long now? 21?
It'll be 22 on August 11th.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Happy early birthday.
Thank you.
Happy anniversary.
I say birthdays because
I
I'm
do
from
too.
LA. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to say that's a very LA thing, because if I say that in New York, people are like, what?
No. And it's anniversaries everywhere else.
Yeah.
But LA, we like to make it fancy and special celebration.
Yes. And it is. I love recovery in LA. It's definitely different than anywhere else, I think. But I would love to rewind. Everybody is probably like, what are you guys talking about? Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us a little bit of your trajectory from before, which you've alluded to, seeing Liz before you got sober, to now?
So going back, I took my first drink of alcohol when I was 16. So it started off as just being in a group of friends. Everyone was doing it. It was I said, okay, let's try it. It's a big night and all of that. And my very first drink led to me completely lying on the grass, lost my keys. But the boy who I was madly in love with that summer, who never spoke to me one time, was the one that came and helped me find my keys and brought me up to my room and put a trash can next to my bed. But that was after I had thrown up all over him. And I woke up the next morning and said to my best friend, that was the best night ever. And I just associated drugs with fun, with boys, and I was off and running. And I think looking back retrospectively, I definitely drank alcoholically from the beginning. That continued through college. I graduated. I went to law school again with the drinking, and I was always kind of right here. And I remember thinking, I wonder if I really applied myself, what would happen? But I was comfortable living in the just right here. And that worked for a while. And then eventually I moved to Los Angeles, and then something really traumatic happened. I'd lost a friend to suicide. And that led me down the path of drugs, really to help anesthetize the enormous pain and really complex PTSD that I was in. And this is many years ago, and no one said you should see, it's 30 years ago, a doctor, a therapist. No one said the word trauma. So I was so lost, and that led me to the drugs. And for a long time, the drugs were a part of my story and fun, I guess, and really not such a way off from a lot of people and how they were living. And I worked in the entertainment business, and I was very social, and it was a part of it. But along the way, as it does with people that have the disease of addiction, is you cross over into that chronic use and you're not able to use the same anymore. And once that happened, and I was alone in hotel rooms by myself for days, paranoid with furniture up against the door, I realized that I had a problem. But to be honest, I had no idea what was wrong with me. I didn't know that I had addiction or alcoholism. I thought that I was going to wind up in the psychiatric ward, which is where my mom's addiction led her. And so that was really scary to me. So by the time I decided that I wanted to get clean and entered a 12-step program and started really focusing on abstinence and then sobriety, I was ready. I was ready.
Yeah. So many things that you said that resonated with me. I mean, I think that also the fact that you didn't know what your problem was, that I think is so common. We have this really kind of crazy inability to see like the reality of our own lives when we're in it. And I think that people who aren't in it don't understand that, because you look at somebody's life from the outside and you can see complete unmanageability as a result of drinking, using, whatever it is, the destructive patterns of that. But when you're in it, you have this blindness to
Mhm.
what's happening. And I remember I was the same way. I mean, from the night that I started drinking, so similar to you, like it was a friend and I at this upperclassman's house, small get together. I drank. Suddenly I was like, part of, and felt ease and comfort and all of that. And the noise in my head turned down. And we were so violently hungover the next day. Like I peed my pants waiting for my dad to pick us up. We were throwing up in the sink the next day because we couldn't make it to the bathroom. My friend is like, I'm never doing that. And I was like, let's fucking go. I want to do that
Let's
tonight.
go.
Yeah. And then it just snowballed from there. So I guess I'll go back to that point. You said that you drank alcoholically from the beginning. So if somebody is listening and they're like unsure about their drinking, maybe it's like a little bit of a problem, but they're not sure if they're drinking alcoholically or not. What is that differentiation?
That's a great question. So if I always say to people, like, if you hear that whisper that something's off, it doesn't feel the same, it's not serving you, you're concerned about it, any of those things, then it's worth looking into. Whether it's just something that doesn't agree with you, or it is actually becoming unmanageability in not one part of your life, but maybe all of your lives, not just with your friends, with your family, but work and all of these things. And a lot of people have a case of the yets, which I call yetism, which is, well, I haven't gotten pulled over yet, and I haven't lost my job yet, and I haven't done this yet. And the yetism, especially now, is so dangerous because there is no sort of hitting bottom these days. A lot of times it just ends with tragedy one time. And so I really try to say, like, just get off at the fifth floor like a lady. Like, you don't have to go all the way down to the sub basement and see what's up. But really, the difference between heavy drinking or problem drinking or the disease of addiction is that once you've had one drink, once it's entered into your system, if you lose the ability to make a cognitive decision with your prefrontal cortex, and even knowing the consequences, and even knowing that you maybe want to go home early, or you want to stop at 3 drinks, or you want to do X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't go according to plan every time, and you wake up feeling like I would, in my quote unquote right mind, never have done that, then you might want to look at, well, I've lost the ability to go from the reptilian part of my brain, which is telling me I need this amount of dopamine, which is an incredibly high amount of dopamine that we don't normally have in our body, or I still have the ability to control it.
Yeah, that was me. Like I always say that I could never, with any kind of accuracy, predict when or how or why I was going to stop. Not never. Usually.
Correct.
And the tricky part was that sometimes I could. I would always say I'm going to have 2 drinks and be home at 10. That was my thing. And more times than not, it was the next day or 6 in the morning or whatever, and it's 10 drinks. But sometimes I would do 2 drinks and be home at 10, sometimes even 1 drink home at 9. And that really messed with me because then I used that as evidence for actually why this isn't a problem, So I think that a lot of people experience that too, where like sometimes it's problematic and sometimes it's not.
Yes, I agree. And I think sometimes the sometimes is lead to the yetism, right?
True. Yeah.
And the issue is that addiction is a brain disease. And this we know, like we're really not in a, discussion about whether it's morality or a disease or not anymore.
Some people are.
I know, but
probably some people listening.
But I think that if the truth is, for those that are listening that don't feel that way, I want to honor that and say it's so complex. So there is an aspect of it that is affecting the way your brain functions on a biological level. There is also a physiological response of craving and tolerance and things like that build up. But then there's also the emotional of I need something outside of myself in order to make myself feel better, instead of that being an inside job. Because everything we reach for outside of ourselves has an expiration date, whether it's a new pair of shoes or a guy or just anything, right? And it will expire in a week, in a day, in an hour, it doesn't matter. And so that's a piece of it. And then there's the underlying psychological, whether there's real trauma going on that is causing your body to be in fight or flight or needing to anesthetize so you don't do something more serious to yourself or self-harm. So it's such a complex conversation that I think people will hold on to at least one of those, but it's really all of them. But what we do know is that it gets worse in time as you get older, whether you're using or not. So if you're in the sometime will eventually become no times. And that's that gray area where people really struggle. And I think the other place that people really struggle is the shame of not being able to have self-control and feeling like they should have willpower. And if you're one of those people, I just want to say to you, like, you can be as smart or as willful or as anything, that this happens to, the best of them and has nothing to do with that.
I always say this, but I admire the people who get off on the 5th floor, like you were saying. I love that analogy so much because, I went to rehab for the first time, I think, when I was 20. So I had been drinking for maybe 2-3 years. I was just getting started. I happened to get a DUI and get caught. And I just thought that I was like the unlucky one because I was doing what my friends were doing.
Right.
And then, every 2 years after that, I would end up in a rehab, a detox, whatever it was. But it wasn't until I was literally on the brink of death where I knew that if I drank again, I would die. And that's what everybody told me. Then I was willing to make some changes in my life. But I know so many people who are like, yeah, I just know that I was racing home from work to get home to that drink and I had to stop. And I'm like, what?
Right.
That's how I was the first year that I started drinking.
Right.
How do you recommend or how do you suggest somebody stop, I guess, if they are still on that fifth floor, if they haven't hit rock bottom, and if they are still kind of like dealing with that, like, am I not? This hasn't happened yet. And I think that when it hasn't happened yet, you don't necessarily believe that it will ever happen.
And listen, we aren't here to say it will, but I think that there's a movement with the wellness culture and people recognizing that at the very least, it's bad for your health. It's bad for your skin. It's bad for your health. You do it for no other reason. But we also have we have, what's it called? Dry January. And so that was something that started out of the country and that we brought here. And a lot of people use it as a way in to just see, how do I feel without drinking? And people that are sober in a 12-step group usually consider being sober, no alcohol, no drugs, no nothing that's going to affect you from, the head up. And that's not to say if something was prescribed or anything of that nature. But there's such a gap now between not drinking but doing X, Y, and Z. It's such a personal choice. And you do what works for you. I'm not here to say, when clients come to me and they say, I'm not an alcoholic, or I don't need to stop drinking, I'm like, okay, so don't. I'm not going to tell you that you need to stop drinking. I'm also not going to say that you're an alcoholic. But I am looking at the why. And I think that's the important part. So maybe to answer your question, stop for 30 days. Look at how you feel and look at the reason. If you're feeling the need to go to it, I think the better question to ask yourself is why.
I'm curious if things like phone addiction, social media addiction has changed the way people drink and use, because I'm just kind of thinking for myself. I mean, my first love was alcohol. I loved drugs. I know you loved cocaine. That was also my thing. I thought cocaine was the solution to my alcohol problem, by the way. When I found it, I was like, oh, this is amazing. All my problems, because I was a blackout drinker. And I was like, now I don't black out. Now I'm like drinking like my friends. This is incredible. But I just wonder, like, if we had social media, phones, all of that back then, if like it would have gone the way that it did. I know that teen drinking is down, right? I know weed is also more popular now and obviously like easier to get, but it's so easy to numb out with different things today versus maybe 20, 30 years ago. Maybe I'm wrong. What's your take on that?
That's interesting. I mean, I didn't grow up, obviously, during a time where there was social media or computers or cell phones, for that matter, in the 1800s. And we took a horse and buggy to school. And so anyway, so we spent a lot more time connecting to our internal world, our imagination, the outside, being in nature. And it's more meditative, period, than scrolling. And I can see the difference. So I think that with social media and with phones and all of it and computers and having access to so much information, that immediately changed the landscape of what people needed to feel better. And it became so easy to press, I'm going to get this on Amazon and get a package. And what a great hit. And I still do this. And then I laugh at myself because I'm like, oh, did I really need, what did I order the other day? I ordered a Stanley. I'm like, everyone has a Stanley. I need a Stanley. And then I got the Stanley and I was like, this is gigantic. I'm never going to use this. But at least I felt better yesterday for 5 seconds when I bought the Stanley.
I heard someone say her spiritual fitness was directly proportional to how many Amazon boxes she has delivered on any given day.
It's maddening. Noticing it is the first step.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I do think that, yes, it changed. And there's also this need for immediate gratification, which obviously these things all bring you. But make no mistake, like COVID was the worst thing that happened to kids, and the amount of depression and suicidal ideation, whether it was drug induced or not, has been so off the charts that even those that I meet with that are suicidal and experiencing suicidal ideation, to hear a child say this is the solution is gut-wrenching and not okay at all in this time. It's 2024. That is not okay, and we're not doing enough about it, and I'd never experienced what I experienced during the pandemic, and it's really what forced me to write because I just felt at such a loss that people didn't have enough information to do stuff on their own. But listen, the drugs are gonna change. It's gonna be weed, and then it's gonna be psychedelics, and now it's all this because you can't take no powder, no pills, nothing white. And, okay, let's do all these other things, let's microdose, let's this. And for a lot of people, yes, of course it helps with depression, just like some people like to go out and have wine, a certain wine with a certain meal. But for those of us that have underlying conditions, serious mental health conditions, underlying trauma, we tend to lose our way.
Yeah, I don't know why, but my whole TikTok is about California sober. And look, I'm not one to judge. I don't have the monopoly on recovery. I know it works for me, right?
Exactly.
But I see a lot of people talking about how they're sober, but they're smoking weed and doing psychedelics. And I'm like, I know for myself.
Giving California such a bad name.
It really, I'm like, why is this a California thing?
Exactly.
And then I saw another one. I think it was Tank Sinatra, a doctor that I know shared this. He's like a meme account creator, but he's sober now too. And he was sharing this viral reel, I think, about these guys who were like, we've been microdosing for 30 days and our lives have completely changed. I feel completely different. And he's like, yeah, because you're taking psychedelics every day for 30 days. Like that's going to change your perception and your reality. But is that sustainable? Right? Yeah.
It's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. And more than that, it can lead to, and maybe for a percentage of people, I don't know, maybe it is, or maybe it's called for. That's the thing. Like everyone's diagnoses and everyone's psyche is completely different. And really, that's like the heart of what I do, is making sure that what people are getting is what they need for who they are, because it's not one size fits all anymore whatsoever. And this piece might be good for this person and this piece might not. And, and the other thing about psychedelics is for those people that have underlying mental health issues, maybe major depression, some form of bipolar, a predisposition to schizophrenia, the chances of them becoming psychotic from that one time are so high that the majority of my clients that are in the psychiatric ward have been brought on by weed. Think about that. So, and no one wants to be in the psychiatric ward.
Yeah. You said something earlier, which was that for people with underlying conditions, right? And I think that one of the biggest misconceptions about addiction, alcoholism, whatever it is that the drugs and the alcohol are the problem. Drugs and the alcohol, a lot of times, are the solution to the problem. I'm curious what you feel you were medicating when you started drinking versus at the end of your drinking, because I know you've talked about this. You accumulate traumas along the way when you're an addict, right? Or alcoholic. And then a lot of people you had your trauma that you experienced with your friend, and that was a turning point for you. But I know for myself, like, there was a reason that I was looking for something outside of myself when I was 17, and why that first drink felt like the solution to all of my problems. And then that reason changed as I went through my addiction, because I also had a major trauma. And then I also had these other traumas along the way, these situations that I got myself in, and just the daily deluge of consequences and shame and all that stuff as a result of my drinking and drugging. And I don't have any mental health, diagnosable conditions underneath, but I had this discomfort. So what was it for you?
think for me, it was the same. I definitely had, there were a couple of things. I was always a little bit of, oh, I was the sister that had the braces. I was the sister that had the bump on her nose. I was the sister that had to wear the back brace because I had scoliosis. And so there was always that sort of that thing of like, oh, poor Elisa, da da da. And but a million friends, popular, like had that. What I did have, and I talk about this and I'm not blaming, is parents that were present in a lot of ways, but maybe not connected in a way where, and I think this is true for that generation, where they explain what's happening or how you feel or why. And I think it's really important because if kids don't understand the why parents are behaving the way they're behaving, you automatically make that about you. And you start to put these little post-it notes on you of, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough. And you live with that narrative. And then all of a sudden, it was for me, you have a drink and you're the hottest girl and the funniest person and just the best partier and the biggest light. And it's just an illusion. And not every time, right? But a lot of the time, and then it becomes a habit, and then a habit becomes an addiction. And so I think that's what it was for me initially, like sort of growing up. And I remember someone saying to me before I was sober, I had gotten into a fight with someone, and they had said the next day, like, I was up all night thinking about this. And it really, I've been going back and forth and really thinking about what you said and how I feel and what I did. And I looked at them like they had three heads. I was like, I don't understand. You stayed up all night to think about this? I never thought about anything except the next. Never retrospectively. Never, thinking about how the other person might have felt.
Yeah.
And that was actually like news. Wow, people think like that? That's so odd. So there's so many things. But then I do think that trauma in its own way is the cause of so many people to reach outside themselves to make themselves feel better, whether they're dissociated or they're stuck in freeze or fight or they've had complex PTSD.
Can you talk about the functional freeze?
Yeah.
I know you've talked about this before, and I was like, ooh, that sounds familiar to me.
So when something traumatic happens, it's different for everyone. Trauma is subjective. And if we talk about, Dan Siegel talks about the window of tolerance. So if we imagine that our window of tolerance is, let's say, a foot tall, during the day, we go up, we go down. All of a sudden, like, we get a weird phone call. We're so annoyed. Maybe we call a friend and then we go back down, right? Our cortisol levels go up and then it goes back down. You're walking along and all of a sudden there's a garden hose. You think it's a snake. You jump and then you realize it's a hose and you calm down. So we're constantly managing within our window of tolerance that was created so that we didn't get eaten by a lion many years ago. And that we didn't do things that were outside of what was socially appropriate, or you get kicked out of the tribe and then you're on your own, which was not safe. So these are very ingrained. So when something happens that takes you outside your window of tolerance, let's just use a car accident. A lot of people will say it felt like it was in slow motion, right? And the reason it feels like it's in slow motion is because your brain only recognizes what it's seen before. When you see something new or you go through something new, your brain can't process it as fast as it's necessarily happening. And if it's so outrageous, if it's so extraordinary, then your brain will shut it off and put you in a state of freeze or fight that will carry on to being dissociated. When people are in a functional state of freeze, essentially they're going through the motions, but those are the people that are like, I can't, I know I should look for a job. And and those are the parents that are calling saying, my kid needs to get a job. My kid needs to get a job. My kid needs to get a job. Why won't they get a job? And I'm like, they're frozen. So yeah, they're showing up, they're doing this, they're going to the gym, they're doing that. But this piece, they're very stuck. And instead of focusing on that, it's always going back to the why. What are we scared of? What's holding us back? What does this moment remind us of? Why won't we take that next step? And why do we feel frozen in this area in our life?
Yeah, and you've said that the trauma isn't the event itself, but it's our reaction to the trauma, right?
Right. So the event is what traumatizes us, but the ongoing trauma, right, that we're experiencing is as a result of the experience that we had and feeling in our body like that experience is still happening. When you're having real flashbacks, that's PTSD, when you actually feel like you're in it. But sometimes your body will just react as if. So someone will say something that reminds you, or you'll smell something, or you'll just be in a situation, or someone will walk in and you'll get like just a general feeling, because trauma experiences are stored on a cellular level in our bodies, and that is what needs to be released, because otherwise it will look like this energy that's either anxiety or depression, or those people that look maybe a little bit manic, or maybe they're getting diagnosed with ADD. But all of that can just be trauma.
Can you go a little bit deeper into that? Like, what cells? Like where?
What cells?
Is it just?
Well, there's these three right over here, Arielle.
But I mean, I know that sometimes people get like gut issues. Like I remember so I had a big trauma. I found my friend murdered for 3 years before I got sober. And, when it happened, I think I went to trauma therapy once. I was like,
what kind did you do?
I don't remember. My parents like came and got me and they sent me somewhere. And I remember I told the therapist what happened and she was like, oh my God. And I, in that moment thought, nope, no one else can deal with this. It's too much. I just need to move on. And that was a real turning point in my drinking and using, because it took on this real survival thing,
Absolutely.
I think, for me. And then when I got sober, like when I was in my first treatment, I was 45 days sober. They somehow found me. I got subpoenaed to go testify. I flew out there, testified against the guy that did it. It was like reliving it, crime scene pictures, medical examiner,
when
the
I
whole
heard
thing.
you share that story, I just...
But it was interesting because it was in Florida and I was flying back to Utah where my treatment was. And I remember being on that flight and being like, I dealt with it. Like, again, I was just like, I don't know why I had this idea in my head that like it wasn't okay to work through it, or
because it actually wasn't.
Yeah. Or like
you weren't ready.
Have any feelings about it. I don't know. I just felt like, okay, I just have to move on. And I did feel like I had some closure from that. And then it really didn't come out until a few years later. And I started doing brain spotting with my therapist years ago. And I remember the first time we did it, my whole body went numb, but the only thing I could feel was like my stomach. And of course I had gut issues at that time too. So does it manifest in different ways for different people? I'm sure it does. Is it more of like a global thing for some people where it just is like How does that show up, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. No one's ever asked me what cells. But such a good
Your
question.
epithelial cells?
Yeah.
No.
So here's the thing when we talk about doing trauma. First, I just want to back up and I want to say that trauma specialty is not taught in, you go to become a therapist or a licensed marriage and family or whatever it is, a social worker, and you're not really going into all of the trauma and the neuroscience behind all of it and all the different types of modalities that help work. And it's also not taught in medical school. So it's really taking it upon these clinicians or anybody that works in the field to really take continued education classes and really understand what all of this means. And someone that is trained in EMDR or someone in somatic experiencing or brain spotting should also have a very deep understanding of the others to be able to say, this would be right for you, or this would be, Bessel van der Kolk always says, like, don't be a one-trick pony, understand everything, because there's moments where my clients need SE, somatic experiencing, or brain spotting would be perfect for them. There's different ways in, right, to people's psyches and bodies. So that's first of all. So the next thing is there's two types of things that happen in the sort of treatment of trauma. Trauma will, in that case, and the same with me for when I had that day, for me, it's so unbelievable and it's too much to really process that it just gets put somewhere in your head, but the feeling that you had the moment you walked in the room or that I got, that feeling, that complete rush of all of those, if you imagine that, that gets stuck. Where it gets stuck, maybe your shoulder, maybe a disease, maybe your gut. A lot of people, your gut, your back, right? A lot of people. And there's a brain gut connection, obviously. And so where it's going to manifest itself is different for everybody. But it's, IBS, all these things. But eventually it's going to just keep manifesting in different places as we get older. And for me, the way that it was coming out was I had extreme severe OCD and panic attacks. And so it wasn't so much that I was, that I was in pain, although there was definitely pain later on. It was I couldn't function. I literally couldn't function. I couldn't walk across the living room without having to do a whole sort of things. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't do any of those things without having all these OCD behaviors, which is very embarrassing and really shameful and makes you feel like you can't tell anyone because it's maddening. So all of these things to say, like, that energy gets stored, right? So it will come out as anxiety. Some people will just be really frenetic. Some people won't be able to be intimate in relationships, right? There's always a bit of a wall. But the first step is about teaching someone how to regulate. So anyone would have said to you that had at the time, or me, listen, you went through an extraordinary trauma response. We're not going to talk about the trauma, the story. The story's irrelevant. Let's teach you how to regulate through breathing and through other exercises when you feel that coming on. And that can be for 5 years. And then there'll be a time when you know intuitively, and usually people have been sober a while before they can take that on. Otherwise, they're going to probably relapse over it. And I think that's the conversation. And then the deeper healing can begin on the actual event. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I remember hearing somebody say that addiction or people who go on to be addicts or alcoholics have a real kind of inherent inability to self-regulate when they're younger. And I identify with that. I mean, I always was just like, I'm so sensitive, I'm this, I'm that. I felt things differently than other people, and I couldn't really like process my emotions in the way that like I saw my friends doing. I remember my friends would go through their first breakups, right? Like in high school, first love, first breakup. They would cry, be sad, and then move on with their lives. I was paralyzed.
Same.
Like,
Same.
and I just couldn't regulate. And so I hear what you're saying, like dealing with that in early sobriety is like a real precarious thing.
And that's
because
all
you don't
you
have
should
the
be doing.
resources. Yeah.
And that's all you should be doing. And that's even why when someone goes to treatment or they seek care outside or they want to go directly to do the trauma work, it's like, no.
But
Because
so many treatment centers do that too.
I know.
They
You
encourage.
don't have the tools.
Yeah. Well, God, there's so many more things that I could talk to you about, but maybe to end on a positive note, you had these major career changes. You were a big talent agent. I know you've talked about breaking up with alcohol, breaking up with your career, going through also a real breakup. You had these major changes, and now you're in this field and doing such amazing work, and you have long-term sobriety yourself. So what are some of the biggest gifts as a result of that for you?
I love that question. The gifts have been the whole thing. I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't gone through all of that. And really going back to school and learning the specific depth psychology that I learned and focusing on neuroscience and trauma, in addition to understanding addiction, was one of the most incredible gifts because it taught me how to do that deeper healing that I was yearning for and didn't understand, that inner world. And then it allowed me to really put together not only like a methodology, but a lifestyle of what I call sobriety, which is really very based in Jungian psychology mixed with other things about bringing in the contents of our psyche, bringing in the unconscious, seeing things through the lens of soul and understanding what that really means. And to me, having more autonomy over my healing, which is what sobriety was always meant for me, then I was able to, I don't know, like just feel more confident and really understand myself on such a deeper level that I was able to walk through life and have the joy and the grief. Because in 22 years, there's a lot of grief that comes up. And this year in particular, I lost, I went through 3 massive losses, and the grief was unimaginable. And had it been any earlier, I would have been frozen. Everything would have stopped. But you have to be able to live in the dark nights of the soul while enjoying the life experiences and the joy and the love. And I think that's the gift.
Love that. And you have an amazing book, Sobriety, also. So everybody check that out and tell everybody where they can find you and find the book. We can link everything in show notes as well.
You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Elisa Hallerman or on Facebook. And my website is drhallerman.com.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.